In 1764, George III was on the throne. The Industrial Revolution was just taking hold, and in Chelmsford, the Essex Chronicle came into being. Originally entitled the Chelmsford Chronicle or Essex Weekly Advertiser, it served a fast-developing county. Chelmsford has traditionally been a hard-working town, prospering by embracing new ideas and expanding trade. Soon, the fledgling newspaper would report the opening of the Chelmer and Blackwater navigation, linking Chelmsford with the sea. And in 1843, the railway arrived. In 1899, the world's first radio factory was set up in Hall Street, and the town became the birthplace of the electronics industry. Chelmsford was the first town to be lit by electricity, and it was industry which continued to shape the character of the town as the 20th century progressed. Chelmsford people have developed a town and country character of their own and a pride in their town's past. There are many ways of opening a window on the past. Collecting postcards is one of them. Let's look at some of the collection of Bob Woodland, himself a postman in the town for 15 years.
My favourite postcards in the collection, I would say, was those taken in Molsham Street, right up to the Stony Bridge, which a lot of people don't realise is still in Molsham Street. The High Street itself, Duke Street, up to the railway station and beyond to the memorial. And I've got a postcard of the memorial without the buildings behind it. I would love to go back in time and look down on the way things were in them days. You know, the Chelmsford was, well, it was a market town. The cattle market was in full swing then. The main changes I've seen in Chelmsford, and I don't consider them to be for the best, is the Parkway Road that's sort of split Chelmsford in two. Molsham Street is now either side of the Parkway, and Molsham Street is a lovely street, and I think it's the only place in Chelmsford that's kept some of its original character. The Stony Bridge, where there used to be a church on the other side of the bridge, and then sort of up the High Street, that has changed almost beyond recognition. I think the oldest building in the town's High Street is the Scottish Bank next to Debenhams. But of course the Saracen's Head, I think that's quite old, and the Shire Hall. Going round the corner a bit into Tyndall Square, the street there was one of the most beautiful streets that I can remember. You know, it coming to Chelmsford in 1967, it was like going back in a different world. Going further along to the Iron Bridge, the building on the right is now the Norwich Union, but I think it was a Congregational church at one time. I've got a postcard of Rainsford Inn, and I couldn't make out which way I was looking at it from, and I decided, being that I used to deliver the mail down there as well, that the first houses I see at Rainsford Inn are still there. On the corner, I think it used to be a garage, but I think Hartwell Fords are store their cars on there now. One of my duties was to deliver the mail at Marconi Works in Riddle Road, and Crompton's in Rainsford Road, Marconi New Street, and I did used to go into a place in Hoffman's where I delivered the mail from time to time, and you know, I had happy memories of these places being alive, hustle and bustle, plenty of work going on there. But now, you know, I look back and all the buildings that I've mentioned are now empty.
In Coronation year 1953, Chelmsford was enjoying the post-war boom. In that year, highly respected local historian and photographer Ron White took off from Southend Airport in a light aircraft. Flying inland via Rayleigh, he was soon circling above
What we have here is an aerial picture taken in 1953 of the road entering Chelmsford from Great Badder. Ahead of you there on King's Head Meadows is a circus, probably Bertram Mills, beside the gasworks. The entrance to the field was from Springfield Road behind Woolworths in those days. There is the Odeon Cinema there. There's also Diath Brothers Furniture Store and a Maltings on the other side of the road. Down past the gasworks you can see the river running through the Chelmer. And the Can is at the bottom and they join forces, the River Can and the River Chelmer. We've progressed across the town here and we're looking down on Springfield Road's entrance to the town. Navigation Road goes from left to right and joins Springfield Road just before you reach the centre of the town. Following Springfield Road down, you'll come into the town, and the road running up towards the top is Morsham Street. Almost parallel to it is London Road, and beyond London Road you can see the cricket field and the football field. Just beyond Springfield Road now, this is an aerial view over the prison, and the road just this side of the prison is Sandford Road. This is a general view over the town from the Broomfield area. And it's a greater height, we've attained a greater height. We're looking down now on the town as a whole. The railway running through. In the centre of the town there you'll see the council offices and the cathedral. And above the council offices is the recreation ground, the football ground and the cricket ground, and beyond them is Bridge Road and Crompton's Works, and heading out towards Riddle. What we have here is the recreation ground with the old trees there before the huge gales came and knocked them down. Beside the railway there you'll see the bus station, the old bus station, and Marriage's Mill and the Marconi's Works. At the top there is the English Electric Works and the Marconi playing fields. What we have here is the English Electric Works. In the corner you'll see the River Can running through, and the road running across the river is Waterhouse Lane, and in the corner is Beeches Road. Before Beeches Road was really built up, and just after the war, that was the first place they put the prefabs, and you'll see 4 prefabs there. Off from Beeches Road runs Ash Tree Crescent. This is the Boy Scouts hut and their little area where they did their actions and so on. And the places each side of the river were what was called in those days the dust chute, and the town rubbish was deposited along that area before it was cleared and grassed over. We're looking at the town now from the Whitford end. The 2 grassed areas you can see there are the football ground in the first one, and the cricket ground on the other end. Beside that is the recreation ground, and in the corner you'll see the Falcon Bowling Green. London Road is the straight road running down, and Bridge Road is the road with the kink in it. The recreation ground is a complete hole from the river to the railway station almost in one direction, and to the market, the old market in the other direction. It's not split up by parkway. Here we are above Riddle Road, and the Riddle Road entrance to Crompton's Works. His old works were in Anchor Street. They got burnt down and he had to rebuild. He bought this site, and the first thing he built was the great office block there. And beyond the office block is the main shops where the great generators and alternators were built. To the right of that was the switchgear department, and a lot of this stuff was used in the war for the generation of power in the field. Beyond is the instrument shop where instruments were made for the RAF, the Navy and the Army. It was a general electrical factory that covered almost everything. Crompton's is where I started work. It's the first job I ever had. And I remained with Crompton's, apart from a short time in the services, until I retired. These works were shut in the mid-1960s, and just the instrument shop was carried on in Essex, at Whittam. We're looking down now on the top, over above the dust chute area and the recreation ground. You'll see beside the river the old cycle track. Everybody in those days seemed to be travelling on cycles. Very few cars about. And just beyond the end of the viaducts there, you'll see the Idris Drinks factory. Beside the river, there used to stand an advert, and stood there for years, for Foreman's Willow factory. And beyond that is the recreation ground. You'll see the shelter there in the recreation ground. That shelter is still there, but it's now a bowling green in front of it, and that is the pavilion. This is a view looking down over the top of St John's Church onto Molsham Street. In this area, St John's Road runs through into Molsham Street, and on the corner there you'll see an old garage, and in that block, it's between Queen Street and Anchor Street, there's a block where Clarkson and Crompton first started up their businesses. Clarkson was a steam bus man, and Crompton's was the electrical engineer, and that's where he first had a factory there, right opposite St John's Church. Clarkson was the gentleman who ran the steam buses, the National Steam Bus Company, and it eventually turned out to be the Eastern National. And this was where Crompton had his factory there. It was from there that he lit the town with electric light. They were arc lights, and this is why the other old works was always called the Arc Works. And we were one of the first towns in the world to be lit by electric light from Crompton's. On this same site where Clarkson and Crompton once had their factories, now is an old folks' place of little bungalows and so on, where a warden looks after old folk that can't look after themselves very well. The area is called Albion Court now, and in Anchor Street there is a plaque on the wall denoting where Crompton's works once stood. In the foreground here you can see the old cattle market, the sheds where the cattle were kept and the pens, and above that is the county offices, which were quite new in those days. Beside that is the cathedral, and in front of the cathedral there you can see the Corn Exchange. And from the Corn Exchange you go across to the Shire Hall. At the top of the picture there's a railway swinging through, and you can see parts of the Marconi Works. This is again, it must be noted, the numbers of trees there are about. Everywhere there were trees in those days. Here we are above the railway line and the branch line that goes into Crompton's works, past the testing station and the old research department. In the foreground is the 10A, where they assembled the large parts of the switchgear. And the railway bridge that you can see there is the bridge that takes Writtle Road from Chelmsford to Writtle. The railway track running into the works brought loads of material in, raw materials, and took finished goods away. And the little building beside the railway track that you can see running in there was just the old stables block that they used to where they used to keep the horses to pull the trucks along on the track, other than bringing a steam train in. The trucks used to be pushed in by the train and left for the horses to take down to the various departments. Here we are looking down a little angle just outside Crompton's. It's Crompton's Social Centre. To the right is Writtle Road corner with London Road, And the AA building on the corner there, that was the AA in those days, is now the BBC Essex headquarters. This is a view from looking from over the centre of the town at Boarded Barns Estate. You can see beyond the country, which is now covered by various housing estates between Chelmsford and Broomfield. The Boarded Barns Estate consisted of a road through the centre with Ockleford Avenue on the top end and Eastern Crescent at the bottom. This is an aerial view looking down on the rear of the Hoffman Works. The social centre is the new building at the top. Rectory Lane runs off to the left, and New Street comes back towards the town. Here we're looking down on the top of Marconi's works, and the road at the bottom is New Street. And the front of Marconi's is on New Street, clearly seen there in front of you. Marconi Road beyond, and above that is Bishop Road. And above that you can see some of the Hoffman Works. Clearly the new building hasn't been camouflaged because it was built after the war, but the buildings beyond are camouflaged. Once upon a time there used to be two masts standing here around about 300 feet high, from which Marconi used to do his broadcasting. These photographs were taken in 1953, and at this time the Marconi Works weren't working on wartime jobs. They were making television equipment, professional television equipment for transmitters and transmission of pictures all over the world. What we have here is the Mid-Essex Technical College, and in front of that was the old library, the library buildings at the end of King Edward VII Avenue. On the corner, just at this end of King Edward VII Avenue, was Britton Pash, the agricultural machinist folk, and in front of that was the old fire station, and to the left of it was the cattle market. In front of the county offices there was the ordinary sort of marketplace where they sold oranges and apples and clothing and all that sort of thing. In front of that you come to the Corn Exchange. This is the long building with the big front. Above that we can see the cathedral and Duke Street running away towards the railway station. In front of the cathedral is the Shire Hall, and the little island in the middle is the Market House and Midland Bank. You can see in front of the Shire Hall that the gun is missing. The gun used to stand in front of the Shire Hall, and the little area there is known as Judge Tyndall Square. The gun at some time or another was moved to Oaklands, and that's where it exists today. It's still there. The Corn Exchange and all these old pubs and one thing or another were knocked down, and the new precinct was built in that area. It was a pity when the Corn Exchange went, because it was such a beautiful building. It used to be used for concerts and shows, and also on Friday it was busy with farmers selling their goods. It was a real area of pubs altogether, all in that area. Pubs and banks. Now you'll be able to see one of the early zebra crossings. Also you can see the top of Barclays Bank and the Saracen's Head Hotel. Here you can see the junction of King Edward Avenue and Market Road, and on the left hand side the stalls for the cattle and for the cattle market, and on the opposite side of the road where they used to keep the chickens and all the small animals such as rabbits and guinea fowl and guinea pigs and so on. Here we see the junction between Back Street and High Street and London Road down below, and Clark's old shop on the corner on a little island there with one of the old banks. Lloyd's Bank, I think, was there. This is the area now taken up by Marks and Spencer's. Marks and Spencer's at this time was on the opposite side of the road. This is a view of English Electric Works, Waterhouse Lane and Beecher's Road with a string of prefabs, the Canadian built prefabs, homes fit for heroes, built just after the war. Most of those prefabs are still in existence today. I know several blokes who live in them. These little prefabs were designed to last for 10 years, and they were so well constructed that they've lasted for 50 years, and people still swear by them. They don't even want to move into a new one. This is a view looking down on Hoffman's again. The new building is the Hoffman Social Centre, and the works buildings you can see beside that. Above that is Rectory Lane, and beyond that, Henry Road. In that area was a lot of bomb damage during the war, and several people were killed there. Is another view of the rear of Hoffman Works, and at the top you can see the Marconi Works with the New Street entrance in front. The railway sidings are right up to the top. The rough ground at the back of Hoffman's was allotments and one thing and another like that. Here you can clearly see the railway sidings where the goods were unloaded that were brought on the goods trains. In this area now, the GPO have a big sorting office. That is a clear view of the old marriage mill that got burnt down, and beyond that is the railway station. And beyond that again is the old bus station. To the right of the bus station, you can be seen the old library. And to the right of that again, the other side of Broomfield Road corner, was Danoon's, the main four Ford dealers for Chelmsford, or the Chelmsford area. Over the bus station, we can see in the white building is the Co-op slaughterhouse. In this picture, we can clearly see that the lake in the recreation ground, and you can also see the extent of the recreation ground as mentioned before, without parkway being driven through the centre. I can clearly remember that the river often flooded in the winter, and coming across one night to go to night school, from Crompton's, the recreation was completely flooded. You couldn't see the edges of the lake, and I rode into the lake on my bike and got thoroughly soaked, books and everything. And the caretaker at the old Tech College, which is clearly seen in the picture there, put me in the basement and drive me off before lessons started. A clear memory of mine, that is.
Jeff Liggett is a member of the Chelmsford Society with a passion for the town's past. Thanks to his foresight in taking photographs over the years and his constant search for old pictures, we have an image of Chelmsford as it used to be. Jeff's family have been connected with the town for over a century.
Where we really started from is when the family came to Chelmsford, which was mid-1890s, when my maternal grandfather and grandmother came to Chelmsford. Came from Cambridge, where they ran a pub, but they moved to Chelmsford in the mid-1890s because a pub had been built specifically, as we understand, for them to come and run, which was called the Market House, and it was in Tyndall Street, owned by Bullards, the brewers from Norwich, and as far as we know, it is the only Norwich Ales pub that's ever been in Chelmsford, Bullards. I remember it from my days as being rather sort of dark and dingy pub. It had 8 pumps, which apparently was pretty unique in Chelmsford, and it stood in Tyndall Street, which was sometimes called Back Street and sometimes called Conduit Street, and there are a lot of pubs down there, very well known, but it was a renowned haunt for local drinkers. We remember as lads going down one side and up the other side. But the Market House never seemed to be one of the favourite pubs along there. I think probably it was because it always seemed to be run by sort of fairly stodgy elderly people, which were my relatives. My grandfather died in 1922, and it was then taken over by his 2 sons by his first marriage, called Albert and Cecil Judge. Albert was a a real crusty old chap to look at him, although he was ever so nice really. And Cecil, who was my uncle, always wore a hat. So, you know, when you went in the pub, your first sight was these two odd characters standing behind the pumps. And it was always fairly dark, but where it really throbbed was on market days. My family were there until the early 1960s, probably about 63, when apparently it went for a short time to another publican who didn't last very long at all for one reason or another, and it eventually ceased being used as a pub in the 1960s. I think the first thing that became after that was a building society. There's a rather nice picture of my mother and grandmother standing on top of the market house with the cathedral in the background, and they refer to the top of the pub as the roof garden, which is a bit grand really. Looking at pictures now, you can't really see that there was a flat roof, but there must have been. I was born in 1939 on the Bordered Barnes estate, and the house still survives to this day. The Bordered Barnes estate, I think, was built, they started in the 1920s and it was probably finished in the 1930s, but it's got a very 1920s ring about it. There's a symmetrical pattern to it if you see it from the air, and when we lived in it, it was certainly in sort of sections. There were bits that were okay and bits were sort of no-go areas. The notorious roads to us as kids were Eastern Crescent and Ockleford Avenue. We were scared to go up there as kids. We certainly wouldn't go up by ourselves. At the end of North Avenue was the school that all the local kids went to. We had a strange teacher there who used to get us to read by clasping our hands over our eyes, and we weren't really reading, but if you sat there long enough and didn't move, he assumed you were reading, and he'd send you over to the shops which were opposite to buy nuts. You'd either buy cob nuts, or if possibly cherries were in season, you'd get cherries and you'd bring them back and give them to Sir, and he'd give you 1 or 2 nuts or a cherry for being good. And then the rest of the class would then also try and sit there looking very serious and reading the books to get nuts from Sir, and he used to keep them in his cupboard. He thought we didn't know he kept them in the cupboard, but we did. The shop we used to buy it from was called Sturgeon's, and it was basically a sweet shop, but sweets were on ration. But we used to fill in with all sorts of other odd things. One of the things I remember most of us eating were Foster Clark soup mixes, and I think Foster Clark was a crumbly one which looked a bit like Horlicks. We also ate Oxo cubes. We used to buy jelly cubes, eat those. You would get things like licorice roots, which we'd get from Sturgeon's. Licorice I don't think was on ration, because you could buy these little licorice imps, which were fairly potent things. That shop still survives to this day. It's not Sturgeon's anymore, I think it's called Rockers, but it's part of the family. There was a barber's there called Rippingale, and there was never a more aptly named barber as Rippingale. He really was vicious, you know. He used to cut out about 75% of the hair and pull out the other 25%. We used to hate going there as kids because he obviously loathed children. Another shop that was there was a Co-op, which is a lovely good old-fashioned cart which everybody went to and everybody knew their divvy number. Ours was 6512, which I've still never forgotten to this day. And they had the lovely overhead money system there where the little chain was pulled, and this thing sort of whizzed across the shop to the little cash box at the end, where this sort of very austere looking woman would take it off and put the change in and whiz it back to the till that you'd used, and then you get your change. And I think across the road by the Barn public house was, I think that was Hugh Wright's, the butcher's there, which again worked a similar system. Rather nice tiling there, but now it's a wool shop, and it's been a wool shop for many years. In about 1952, we moved up to Badder Road. It was the old Badder Road, not as it is now. It's the Badder Road that used to go past the old Odeon Cinema, which was gone. The Army and Navy pub at that time was what we would classify as sort of fairly posh. And just on from there was the timber yard, which was Guards, which is still there, but that was an interesting place at the time because they had a wonderful array of timber there. Going on from there, you came into the area where Brandon House still are, on the right-hand side, approaching the town centre. But there was a lovely old building on the right, which was a sort of warehouse, which was partly a furniture removal firm called Diaths, which was actually spelt death, but always pronounced Diaths. Very well established Chelmsford company. And the other half of that building, I believe, was Trigg&Moore Builders. They had workshops in there. You can hear the lovely sound of the circular saws ripping into wood, and as you went past, you got the smell of sawdust coming from it. Very evocative. The Odeon Cinema was next to that was a group of old buildings which were very ancient, allegedly. Apparently, it was a tannery in Victorian times and prior to that. They're very rambling buildings. There was all sorts of things there. There were workshops and stores and offices. In the town centre, there was a road called King Edward Avenue, and technically it's still there. But what's unusual about it is that County Hall has been built over the top of it. If you know the main entrance to County Hall, you come along Market Road, and County Hall is on your right, and you go up the very wide steps to the revolving doors at the top and into the lovely atrium, and walking straight on you can go through sliding doors into the car park at the rear of County Hall, and you eventually end up in Victoria Road South. Well, all of that up until the time the new County Hall building was built was a street called King Edward Avenue. In its time, rather a nice road. On the left there, before the new E block of County Hall was built, was this wonderful triangular building. My recollection of it is that it was owned by Britton Pash, who were sort of farming engineers and merchants, and it had a lovely turret at the pointed end. I think its last use upstairs was as and it was called the Triangle Club for Essex County Council staff. Unfortunately, with the building of the new County Hall, that was all demolished. But I believe that the tower, or the turret, which was at the pointed end of that, does survive in somebody's garden somewhere in Little Waltham. There are also one or two buildings used as offices for the County Hall because it wasn't big enough to cope with the staff. And I actually worked in a place there when I left school, and that's a house on the corner of King Edward Avenue and Victoria Road South, which was overlooking the new Technical College building opposite when that was being expanded in the late 50s. Just down to the left there, a new building has been built, which is owned by an insurance company. Now that was the Territorial Army building in Chelmsford, which was a superb building. It had wonderful style, brickwork, and it had just a certain feeling about it. It was a design of Frederick Chancellor, Chelmsford's most renowned architect. There are a few buildings of his that still survive in Chelmsford. That one, unfortunately, was only pulled down 2 or 3 years ago. There was a lot of objections to it locally. It's not an unpleasant building, but they've made a little concession to the local people by putting a cupola on the top, which a lot of people who don't know Chelmsford too well say, what on earth is that? Well, in actual fact, it's meant to reflect the cupola which is currently in Tower Gardens in Chelmsford along the Rainsford end. It did at one time stand on the corner of Springfield Road and the High Street. I'm not an expert on the buildings of Frederick Chancellor, but I'll say he was well respected as an architect in Chelmsford and surrounding areas, and even further afield. And in fact, we named the Chancellor Hall after him.
Chelmsford has long been a busy shopping centre with department stores to rival London's West End, big high street names, and a variety of long-established local traders and specialists. These time-lapse pictures, taken in the mid-60s, show the hustle and bustle as shoppers from a large area of central Essex converge on the high street. Marion Rowe made at least one shopping trip to Chelmsford every week.
I used to walk from Great Baddow with the 2 girls in the pram, mainly because I couldn't afford the bus fare, and also I couldn't have my shopping and the 2 children without the pram. They didn't cater for prams in those days like they do now. to cross the road from Bonds to Bolingbroke and Wenley's, it was quite an art, really. Well, to us in those days, but the traffic these days is far worse, of course. And, well, I used to go to Sainsbury's mainly. They used to cut the cheese, and in the centre there used to be a piece with no rind or anything in it, just pure cheese. And as soon as I saw that there, I was in. And I used to buy that piece. Oh, it's delicious. And my butter, I used to get that there. It was about 1 and 10 a pound, I think, then. And, well, groceries. And they used to use the butter pats. And there, it was, you know, a long shot. And at the end was the lady taking the mummy. And at the corner of Badder Road, there was a very nice fruit shop, vegetable shop. And everything was on show, and everything was, I think he used to wipe on his apron before he put them on show, the apples and things like that. And also Bonds. If I ever had the chance, I always used to go there and have a pot of tea, and they're wonderful scones. I don't think I've ever had scones like that. I used to have the bazaar in Bonds for the children Christmas, but I don't think there was anywhere near the toys and amusements for children. They made their own. I mean, they read much more than they do now, I think. Never had the amusements for you. And not only that, I think in those days I don't think people had so much money. They couldn't afford the toys and bikes and things that they have these days. The children used to like to go into riders because they did have toys and bikes and different things, and they used to like to look and touch. As I say, that's as far as they got. And my mother-in-law and her sister, who lived at Ilford, used to once a month come to Bolingbroke and Wendy's because they considered that was the shop. Even in those days, and it's still going strong, isn't it? Oh, I used to get my meat in Tyndall Street from Hugh Wright. I remember it was terribly short, it was all on ration, and I was in there one day and a dear old lady came in, and the chap behind the counter that we always tried to get him to serve us was Joe. And she came in one day and she said, "Oh, Joe," she said, "do you think you could spare me some liver?" "Oh, I'm sorry," he said, "we haven't got any liver." "Oh, I'm sure you've got a bit in that fridge at the back." She said, "My daughter put her pressure cooker on and it blew up." She's hurt herself. Whether it was true or not, I don't know, but I don't think she got her liver. No. Rankin's was next to the Regent. That was the drapers with the pulleys. And I used to get my eldest daughter's school uniforms there for the Molsham Street school. That's the only shop you could get it. But, oh, and the cafe, Williamson's. That was very nice. Very nice shop for teas and cakes and things. That was a treat. You didn't do those kind of things very often, not when you got two young babies. But, oh, and Collins in Springfield Road, that was a nice shop, sold cups and saucers and things like that. And also on the corner was Boots. I used to go in there quite a lot. And they always smelt of, to my mind, it was mice. But it was from the brewery. It was the yeast. But always had that funny smell. And of course they're not there now, are they? They're in the precinct. And of course Mac Fisheries. That was along. I used to get fish from Mac Fisheries. Oh, and Black and Smith's, of course, opposite Mac Fisheries. That was a very nice shop for, well, anything really. Cups and saucers and different hardware things. But of course my husband's favourite shop was Gripper's. He often used to go in there. Yeah. And of course there was a 50-shilling tailor's, wasn't there? That was on, I think that was on the corner opposite Bonds, on the Springfield Road, 50 shilling tailors. 50 shillings. I can remember shops called the guinea shops, and you could go in there and buy anything from a coat, skirt, anything, and it never cost more than a guinea. Waymites, yes, that was on the corner of Tyndall Street and London Road, and there was just a few places where you could sit down, but mainly you sat on stools at the counter. It was quite a popular hangout for youngsters. And then, of course, the cottage restaurant was owned by Miss Ashford. She was a spinster. That was very nice. Nice food. It was a cottage restaurant where you could get all homemade sponges and things like that. Homemade soup. Broomfield Road had a Woods baker's. That's very nice bread. And they also had one in Molsham Street. That closed down, but the Broomfield Road one's still open, isn't it? Well, there's two Hawks. There was one not far from the Regent, and then there was one, you know where the roundabout is now? You go round and up Victoria Road or to the station. Well, there used to be a Hawks more or less on the corner there, and sold very good sweets, because they had their own factory, didn't they? Marzipan bonbons was one of my favourites. Sharp super toffee, remember that? Hawks? Very nice sweets. We still had queues, you know, especially in Sainsbury's. Always queued up for your butter and cheese and different things, and then your groceries on the other side. But there was always a queue. But more leisurely, of course, much more leisurely. I'm afraid the big supermarkets, I think your eyes are watching the people moving about, and there's so much to choose from. Yes, I used to like the individual shops.
The late Roy Campion will be remembered by many as an entertainer, but he was also a very competent home movie maker. His son, Brian Campion, who passionately believes that Chelmsford heritage must be preserved, is grateful that his father has given us a glimpse of pre-war life in the town.
In the early 30s, cine cameras were very few and far between, and I believe they were quite expensive to run. But whatever, I'm glad that my father did go to the expense, because we've got such lovely memories. I remember that Carnival Day was one of the days of the summer for the people of Chelmsford. The Carnival Queen, she was a very important person, and I believe she always followed John Bull. John Bull was always in the front of the carnival, followed by the Carnival Queen. It was always quite nice to see her. Well, I think so anyway. And all the contributions to the carnival, the collections and raffles and whatever, as far as I can remember, everything was paid actually to the hospital in New London Road, the Chelmsford and Essex Hospital. All the carnival is actually in various classes, the walking class and those on bicycles, and the rather large ones, and also the commercial ones, of course. The main factories, which were Hoffman's, Marconi's and Crompton's, I know that the apprentices there spent quite a long while building quite large projects, ships and aeroplanes and things of that sort. And I think it must have cost the factory quite a lot of money in time, but it was something prestigious at the time to win that award, I believe. I can remember taking my children down when they were sort of 10 and 12 years old, and it was quite a crowd down there, and I've actually stood on the steps of the Shire Hall so that the children can see over the heads of the people if we got there late. After the carnival there's always a fair, and during the fair there'll be a firework display. That is the ones I can remember. I really can't remember the 1930 ones, I must say. In fact, I was probably too young to say if the fireworks, if they were late at night. One thing I do remember is that after the war, you could buy pieces of pineapple. And of course we'd go on years and years without pineapple, and this was a really big treat to go and pay sixpence, I think it was, for a piece of pineapple. But the fairs were super, noisy and smelly, because they had steam engines, of course.
For a 3-year-old, Chelmsford was always filled with magic for Brian, particularly when the cattle market was held.
Yeah, the cattle market was in Market Road, of course, hence the name, I suppose. And I was taken down there regularly as a little boy to see the pigs and the sheep. All the cattle, of course, were driven through the town in those days, and everything had to stop. And now and again, of course, a cow or somebody or something would get loose and run riot around the town and terrify everybody. And but that, of course, has happened for many, many years. Position was in Market Road, which was actually behind the Corn Exchange. Nowadays, of course, I think that's where the General Post Office is. Behind that, we had the fire station. On the same side was the cattle market. Then over the other side of the road, there were hutches for the rabbits, ducks and chickens that were being sold. And day-old chicks at a penny each. Yeah, that's where they were, over the road there. And of course, it was all auctioned in those days. And I can remember the old drovers coming in with their sticks and their old boots on and trousers tied up with string. But that was nice. I think we were easily pleased in those days.
Let's take to the air once more with Ron White, whose knowledge of Galleywood is well known. Ron takes us back to the Galleywood of over 40 years ago.
This is Galleywood from the air in 1953. We're starting looking at Galleywood from the Stock Road end. As the road enters Galleywood from Stock, we follow it along. We come to the entrance to Byron Hall. Byron Hall is a large hall that's situated on the common, quite close to the race course. In fact, a lot of the race course people used to live in Byron Hall. We carry on a little further and we come to the lane that leads off to the left that goes to Wood Farm. Carrying on, we come to a little portion of common which was once taken up by the brickfields. That is on the left-hand side of Stock Road before one reaches Galley Hall. Carrying on along Stock Road, we come to Ponds Road, which is a turning off to the right, and in the end of Ponds Road was Galley Hall, and Galley Hall has now been destroyed, knocked down, and the paddocks built on the land that belonged to Galley Hall. Carrying on a little further up Stock Road, we come to what was called the Twitten, which was a road that ran from the street into Stock Road, which has now been closed off because of a number of accidents that occurred there. We carry on up the Twitten and we come to the old post office, which was in the street. Going back down the street towards Ponds Road, we come to the site of one of the old windmills and mill house. Carrying on down, we come to Well Lane. Following Well Lane round, we come to Aplin's shop. And now, opposite Aplin's shop, is the entrance to Barnard Road Estate, which was built on the land to the left of this particular scene. Carrying on round Well Lane, we come to Little Well Cottage, which is really very old. And here there was a well which supplied water for quite a lot of the village on Lower Green. Opposite the Well Cottage is the chapel, which was built round about the 1860s. And opposite that is Well House, which is another ancient building built somewhere around about the 16 and 1700s, still in existence. Further along Well Lane we come to Morton's, which was another large house which has now been demolished and Morton Estate built there. Right, back on Stock Road we come to the race course, and if we carry on down the race course we come across the end of the Twitten, which takes us out into the common and out onto the far side of the race course where the grandstands stood. There were two grandstands in those days. And we carry on across the common until we come to the Admiral Rouse pub. The Admiral Rouse pub at this time was Brazier's Tea Rooms, and at the present time now is a private house. The Admiral Rouse in the past had a bad name. There was a murder committed there in the 1890s, and the chappie was one of the last to be hung in Chelmsford prison for murdering his wife. We're back in the street now. We come across a shop which was used to be in those days Miss Lloyd's clothing shop, and the baker's next door. And just beyond that, in years gone by, back in the end of last century, was a smithy. And the street carries on there with council houses one side and private houses the other, until you come to the Eagle Public House and the old school, which is now a youth club. Coming back to the old post office is a footpath that used to lead down into Well Lane. Down this footpath could be found the Scouts' hut and the allotments for those who hadn't a big enough garden already. And the field that's beside these allotments was called the Blacksmith's Field, and it's now called Chaplain Close. But the road, the old footpath is now a road which runs right down almost to Well Lane. The last part of the footpath still exists. Going back to the common and the grandstands, we'll notice that the common was much less overgrown in those days. And we come across the old embattlements for the Napoleonic Wars, for the defence of London, just at the back of Mill House, and the site of the corn mill, which was beside Mill House. The blacksmith pond, just across the opposite side of the road, which is a great place for the kids to fish in the 50s. We now come to Margaretting Road. And crossing Margaretting Road, we go across the top end of the racecourse to the Horse and Groom pub, which was built around about the 1830s or 40s for the merriment of the companies that used to run the horse races. And opposite of the Horse and Groom was Mill Hill, a really old hill of old houses at one time, which is now really modernised. Coming back to the Horse and Groom, we come further around the racecourse and come to the church, which was built in 1873. Following the racecourse round, we come back to the Eagle pub and the old church school, which is now a social centre. Onto the Stock Road now, and going towards Chelmsford, you come to the very first house on your left-hand side is the Castle House. In days gone by, it was the site of the Elephant and Castle pub. And just below that was Wascott's Garage. On the opposite side of the road, a big reservoir was built. And we carry on down there and we come to Beehive Lane, the entrance to Beehive Lane. It's still 1953, and this is an aerial shot over the middle portion of the village. Below us here we can see the White Bear Public House. At the end of Skinner's Lane we can see Pym's Farm, and behind Pym's Farm an old blacksmith's shop. On the opposite side of the come to an old house which is now knocked down. It's number 2 Skinner's Lane, and Jarvis's used to live there. Beside that was a greengrocer's shop, and just below that a cobbler's shop, which in 1954 or 5 turned into a fried fish and chip shop. Quite a good mixture. Goodwin House then followed, and Eads, the old baker's shop, came after that, end onto the road. Beyond that was the Lions, which was the site of the old Blue Lion pub, now long gone. And beside them were the stables. Now all this block of buildings has disappeared, from the stables to the blacksmith shop and Pym's Farm. Everything is gone. And new housing is built in, with the kitchen shop taking the place of Jarvis's old number 2. Carrying on down Watch House Road, you come to a bungalow and then to Walter's farmhouse, which is an old farmhouse and it used to be a large fruit farm. The outbuildings have now gone, but the farmhouse still stands. A little further down the road we come to another old place which has disappeared, Gallydean. It's barely seen on this picture and I've never been able to find a photograph of Gallydean. If anybody knows where there is one, I'd be pleased to know. Gallywood still is a nice place to live in and to wander about in. There are some beautiful spots still to be discovered, and anybody who lives in Gallywood should take the time to wander around and find out what they've got around them. It comes winter, spring, summer or autumn. There's always something to see.
For over 230 years, the people of Essex and Chelmsford had been served by the Essex Chronicle. The newspaper was founded in the town and has itself become an important part of Chelmsford history. The Essex Chronicle's present editor and editorial director is Stuart Rawlins.
The Essex Chronicle was first launched in 1764 from a shop in Chelmsford High Street opposite what was then the Black Boy. Now the Black Boy stood at the corner of High Street and Springfield Road, so it's a safe bet to say that the Chronicle was on the site of the present Marks and Spencer's. It was launched by, we think, a Scotsman, William Strooper. He sold it for 2.5 old pennies, and it bore the line underneath the title, "To be continued every Friday." His first edition he actually gave gratis, so it was probably one of the first free newspapers. 1764 actually was nearly 25 years before the Times was launched, and since then the Chronicle has carried, indeed published reports of most of the significant world events, from, of course, the Battle of Waterloo and Trafalgar, the Crimea, right through to today's local news and sometimes international news. If you look back, some of the proprietors were forward-thinking in that they were entrepreneurs of the time. They were very much involved in the development of Chelmsford. They were very much involved with the politics of the town, hence John Ockleford Thompson was 8 times mayor of Chelmsford during the 1930s and 40s. One of the previous owners of the Chronicle built a theatre in the town. The Essex Chronicle launched what was probably again the first jobs agency in the area. It was called the Essex Register. They also minted their own halfpenny coin, and this, I believe, was to celebrate the building of the Shire Hall in 1794. Some of the issues raised through the Chronicle were fairly crucial to the development of the town. Bear in mind that there wasn't the same sort of communication that we have today. It's instant communication today. Pre-1930s, whilst there was radio, it wasn't as instant as it is today, and still the people in the town would have relied on newspapers to give them information. More so pre-1900, when it was a case of the only information you read on a public basis was either on public notices or through newspapers such as the Essex Chronicle. The Chronicle, by the way, is the longest established business in Chelmsford and probably one of the longest established businesses in Essex. The Essex Chronicle has been presenting news to the people of Essex for more than 230 years. We've told millions of stories, and the paper has been welcomed into countless homes. We still continue to publish every Friday, as indeed William Strooper promised in that first issue of August the 10th, 1764, when he wrote, "To be continued every Friday."
Time and time again, Chelmsford has demonstrated its ability to cope with change. Indeed, its spirit and energy has driven change rather than been driven by it. The hard work and enterprise of its people has developed what could have been a sleepy country town into a scientific and industrial centre of excellence, which is recognised around the world. Chelmsford and its colourful past is indeed something to be proud of.